Allow me to greet you with words from Ephesians 1. Greetings in the name of him who was raised from the dead and seated at the right hand of the heavenly places, far above all rule and authority and power and dominion, and above every name that is named, not only in this age, but also in the age to come. Good morning. Well, the passage for you this morning is Acts chapter 9, and it's one of the most known and appreciated chapters in Acts. This is the story of Paul and his conversion, the Lord's appearance to him. Now, one of the qualifications for being a disciple was that you had witnessed, you had seen Jesus, you had spent time with Jesus. And here, one of the qualifications of being an apostle, was that you had seen Jesus. And here is Paul's time seeing Jesus. Allow me to read you starting in verse 1. Meanwhile, Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues of Damascus, so that he found any who belonged to the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. Now as he was going along and approaching Damascus, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him, and he fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? And he asked, Who are you, Lord? The reply came, I'm Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But get up and enter the city, and you will be told what you are to do. And the men who were traveling with him stood speechless because they heard the voice, but saw no one. And Saul got up from the ground, and though his eyes were open, he could see nothing. And so they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. For 3 days he was without sight, and neither ate nor drank. Now there was a disciple in Damascus named Ananias, and the Lord said to him in a vision, Ananias. He answered, Here I am, Lord. And the Lord said to him, Get up and go to the street called Straight, and at the house of Judas look for a man of Tarsus named Saul. And at this moment he is praying, and he has seen a vision, and a man named Ananias came in and laid his hands on him so that he might restore his sight. But Ananias answered, Lord, I have heard from many about this man, how much evil he has done to you and your saints in Jerusalem. And here he has authority from the chief priest to bind all who invoke your name. But the Lord said to him, Go, for he is an instrument in whom I have chosen to bring my name before the Gentiles and kings and before the people of Israel. May the Lord bless the reading of his word. Well, Acts chapter 1, verse 8 said, Jesus said that the disciples would bear witness to him that he was the Son of God, that he ministered, that he died and he rose from the dead. They would bear this witness of the gospel in Jerusalem and in Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the world. And that's what we're seeing here in chapter 9 is a key stage of God's mission to have a big, big family. No matter how far or where you're at, that you might be included in that family. Paul was a key agent of that missionary spread. He would be, the key to apostle to the Gentiles, to us, anybody not Jewish. This kind of growth and spread of the gospel from Jerusalem through Judea, through Samaria, through the ends of the world is really reminiscent of an Old Testament metaphor. God would speak of his people Israel like a vine. he had hoped Israel. This comes up in Isaiah chapter 5, in Psalms 80, that Israel would be like a vine, tenderly planted, that would spread over the whole world, offering the fruit of the knowledge of God and his blessings. Now, Israel wasn't able to live up to that vocation to be a vine of blessing to all the world. And so Jesus takes on that vocation that Israel couldn't do upon himself. In John 15, he says, I am the vine. I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to spread over the whole world, offering the blessing of the knowledge of God and love. And he says love. That's what he says the knowledge of God is, love. In chapter 9, we also see here that means of how the vine spreads. Now, Jesus told us that there will be pruning, that the vine will be cut and, tied up, and that the vine just doesn't grow on its own, and basically it doesn't just grow wildly. It is tended to. And here we have an example of someone experiencing hardship or struggle, change, and that being a part of God's growth process, both for, his mission to all the world and in that individual person. So I had mentioned to you earlier that one of the ways that God shows his power is by coming in the struggles, coming in the hardship, and making what seemed to only be a defeat into a great victory. We see this in the death of Jesus. He comes into the death, he comes into this low point in human history and creates our greatest victory, the resurrected Christ, who leads us to victory over sin and death, and all the things that try to bind us as well. Well, not only does God come into the struggles or the things of life, but he comes into us. And so here we have Paul, who thought he was doing God's will. He thought he was right. He was righteous, but he's opposing the church. And again, God shows his power by coming into the church's greatest enemy, someone actually going, from town to town, hauling people to jail and basically charging them to be killed. God takes the church's greatest opponent and makes the greatest evangelist of the apostles. Paul takes upon himself, is charged by God to preach to all the Gentiles, to spread this new word, and he spreads it. And that's why we have, 2/3 of the book of the Bible are Paul's letters to these different churches he has helped to plant, or he's come alongside and helped to encourage. God comes to his greatest opponent and makes his greatest evangelist. There's a couple of verses here that I find that stand out to me. And one is in 9:4, where Paul says, who are you, Lord? Actually, 9:5. That's, this person, Paul, we know from Scripture that he was a Pharisee of Pharisees. And in fact, he was trained by high-level Pharisees, very famous Pharisees. Of the two most famous Pharisees of this day, he was trained by one of them. He would have had the entire Old Testament memorized. He would have had an education on par with a place like, for us today, it'd be like someone with a degree from Harvard or Princeton or Yale. He had spent his entire life memorizing and being able to answer who the Lord was and where he was. But here in this moment, he is struck by this vision from God, and he says, who are you? All that stuff I thought I knew, I didn't know. Who I thought you were and how you're acting, you weren't. And this gives us a great example of what it means to come to the Lord and to continue to be converted to a faithful disciple of his, is that we remain open. We remain open to learning things that we thought we knew, to being corrected when we thought we had all the answers, that we remain open to God teaching us things that we could have never imagined. Another passage that I really appreciate is here in 9:13, where Ananias says, "Lord, I've heard about this guy," and I'm going to paraphrase. He is a bad guy. He's a bad dude. Like, whew, he's causing a lot of trouble. Again, the Lord is showing his power by taking the church's greatest opponent and making it its greatest evangelist. And along the way, he will need people like Ananias who know all the problems, but are still willing to extend grace and mercy to those that are in process, who are changing from one way to another, to welcome him in. It wasn't easy for Ananias to go. I'm sure that he had doubts, that he probably thought, oh my goodness, I'm about to lose my life. I'm sure he had that thought. Maybe he didn't. But invariably he went. He knew the problems. He knew the danger of interacting with this Saul from Tarsus, and he went anyway because the Lord commanded him. The Lord commands us often to go to people we wouldn't go to reach out to people we wouldn't have interaction with, people we'd like to stay clear away from, because it's part of his greater purposes to restore and to renew and to love and to spread the knowledge of his mighty power. Another passage here in 9:15 that stands out to me, it says, "But the Lord said to him, Go, for he is an instrument whom I have chosen, to bring my name before the Gentiles and the kings, and before the people of Israel." And then I'll read further. "I myself will show him how much he have to suffer for my name." The Lord's purposes will continue. He will use every challenge and every victory. He will even use opponents to the faith as a part of his purposes. Chapter 9 in Acts is saying the Lord's work will continue. And what is this work? The Lord's work is that all might have a chance to know that Jesus Christ was his Son, and that he rose from the dead in victory. And that same power that was at work in him, the Lord is waiting to pour that power into us. And you say, well, how? How would I have that power? And in chapter 9, you see, as I mentioned, that power is poured out in Paul by him staying open to learn something new, by people who would have been opponents or stayed clear away from each other being drawn into fellowship, and more people knowing about the Lord's work and about Jesus. Well, chapter 9 is a real key part of the book of Acts. What you'll see is, in its narrative, the message really starts to grow more and more amongst people who are not Jewish. It's spreading. It's still growing amongst the Jewish population, but it's spreading now, per Acts chapter 1, to the ends of the earth through Paul. What a perfect person that God would use in one real way to help us know about the faith as Gentiles. Well, may chapter 9 and God's work and all the hard times and good times and all the tough people and friendly people be an encouragement to you. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and give you peace. To him who is able to do immeasurably more than all you ask or imagine, to him be the glory and the honor and the power forever and ever. Amen. God bless you today.